Hey everyone, really quick before we jump in, I'm excited to announce that the Transforming Cities podcast is now a part of the Smarter Living podcast network. Now, what this means practically is that Smarter Living is becoming your one-stop destination for the best content across the entire multifamily industry. Head on over to smarterliving.io to get on the list. On this episode, I'm speaking with Brandon Reed, founder of Loft Six Four, a creative design firm for immersive rooftop amenities and outdoor living experiences. Brandon is an entrepreneur, visionary, and closet Halo gamer enthusiast known for his charisma, witty optimism, and of course, creativity. Over the last 10 years, he and his team have worked on some of the most prestigious projects in Salt Lake City, including Fourth West and more recently, the Post District. Let's dive into my conversation with Brandon. All right, Brandon, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Happy to be here, my friend. Thanks for having me.
Let's take a dive. Let's jump right in and tell me a little bit about your hometown and what your family and friends were like as a kid, because I know you have a pretty cool origin story and also maybe a cooler original town name that you came from too.
Well, I'll tell you this much. I've already accomplished my life's goal, which was to not live in my hometown that I grew up in. But as far as growing up, had a really great childhood, like fantastic family. I grew up as, I guess my parents would say, an angry child, but had lots of neighborhood friends, really into like alternative sports. And so skateboarding, snowboarding, all those kinds of things. I just was like geared towards that growing up. My family, 2 brothers. I'm the oldest. Like I said, had a great family, but for some reason growing up had issues with my family, even though they were amazing. It was like, I don't know if it was just my anger issues, but I just kind of saw them as like not as cool as me. And I probably was not cool at all, but it was just like, these guys aren't, as cool as me. I'm somehow the coolest thing ever. So anyway, my parents were patient with me there.
So who told you that they thought that you would become a serial killer? I got to know, are you gonna label anyone or just say someone in the family said that?
I'll just say my uncle, we were at actually, where were we? I had a nephew. I was going to see a nephew that had just got home from school or something. And my uncle was there. And this is my mom's brother, one of her younger brothers. We just got talking and they're like, we're just so amazed at how well you turned out. Like we had such low hopes for you. We were just, with as angry as you were, I thought you were going to be a serial killer. So kind of in that realm. And I was like, really? You thought I was going to be a serial killer? That's pretty harsh.
That's tough.
And he's a pretty matter of fact guy, like really great guy, but just tells you how it is. He doesn't mince words. So,
and hey, you made it out. You're not a serial killer. So far as we all know, and that's great. Yeah. So you were into like the outdoors, snowboarding stuff, alternative sports. I feel like that was because I grew up in a similar time period where it was like, the Warped Tour and like the Vans kind of like skate scene was happening and like some of the like rock and grunge music scene was happening. And I imagine you kind of like just came up in that, kind of fit that bill pretty well. I feel like a lot of youths of our era probably did.
Yeah, exactly. Like Bones Brigade, if you want to go way back to the roots, Tony Hawk, when he was first like in the Bones Brigade, that's when I started skateboarding, because kind of when they got that. So always had aspirations to be some pro skateboarder or snowboarder. Lived in a town, didn't have any of the cool stuff that you'd watch on videos, them doing stuff, so we made the best of it. But yeah, the grunge era through high school, loved, remember when Nirvana came out, Pearl Jam, all those great bands. Those got me through a lot of fun high school years and a lot of great inspiration while snowboarding on the slopes.
Yeah, I'm at a phase now where I'm teaching my son about. He's only 2, but I'm teaching my son about Pearl Jam, and he's into a few of the songs. So getting him started early. You said before that your house growing up was actually a really big inspiration for you, and specifically what did you mean by that? Because I think that could go a couple different ways.
Yeah. So the house I grew up in, this I guess goes back maybe to my anger issues or whatever, but I just did not like our house. I was just, once again, it was like I felt like it was too small. I remember hating the carpet in the house, and it was a tiny house. I'm talking like 800, 900 square feet. And I remember my dad did an addition, and added another like 300, which was our kind of great room. We even had a wood burning stove in it, but I just remember thinking like, oh man, this carpet is ugly. The layout is wrong. Just had a lot of things like that for some reason. Like, I don't even know why. I was into skateboarding, snowboarding. Why would I care about the layout of a house? But it just, a lot of things bugged me about it, you know?
Yeah. And so when you were, I mean, it seems like you were noticing those things as a younger guy. So fast forward
Yeah.
to like high school and college, let's say, where did your interests align at that point? Like, were you already thinking about, this idea of sort of design and architecture and so forth, or not even on the radar yet?
Yeah, I would say, I always, for some reason, also maybe it was part of that, just that alternative type of thing, but loved art. I used to just draw things randomly, and in my basement room, and so art, and then kind of a little bit understood architecture. And so in high school, I was like, how do I marry those two? Heard of AutoCAD or whatever, and there was a drafting club my best friend was in, and I was like, seems nerdy, but let's do that. So it was part of that, and kind of fell in love with this idea of just like being able to draw things so specific. So I kind of was able to marry those a little bit as far as just my interests, and kind of perked my attention, at least like as high school evolved and you're getting ready to graduate, you're like, what am I going to do? I thought either airline
Mm.
pilot, architect, or artist. And I thought starving artist. I heard too many horror stories about that. Like, you'll never make money. Architecture, being an airline pilot, whatever. I thought, I don't want to go to the Air Force. They said that was the best route to go, and my eyesight wasn't the greatest. So it kind of led me to architecture. So I thought, I'm going to be an architect.
And so you ended up going to Utah State, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, yeah,
And yet you didn't go there for architecture. And there's a story there because,
yeah,
architecture versus what you ended up in. Would love to hear a little bit more about that story.
yeah. Of course. Um, so high school, graduate. I'm just thinking, okay, I have a year before I have to make any big decisions. My friends were heading up to this college, like 2 hours north of where I lived. Didn't really look into what they even had at school. And I get up there, thinking, okay, I'm going to be this architect or a potential. They didn't even have architecture up there. And I'm like, well, that's kind of dumb. But they had this thing called landscape architecture, and took a couple classes in that. One, remember, it was basic graphics, and just kind of fell in love. I was like, wow, this is actually super cool. I could marry architecture and art in kind of a way of, just fell in love with plan graphics and anything graphic and kind of creative. I was just like, this is it. So once I discovered that, took that class, I was just like, I'm going to be a landscape architect. And so from then on out, I was just like, I would tell everyone, this is what I'm going to do. Didn't look into it. Didn't look into salary, into future, into really what that meant. But I just thought architecture, art, kind of can do it all. So
Yeah.
kind of how it ended up, at least.
And someone along the way told you, hey man, hey Brandon, things are not going to be as easy as they're in college. Like the firm, when you get into the real world, the firms are going to work you to death. You're going to be doing 60-hour, 80-hour weeks. And that's going to be your life forever. And so I think, talk to me about that transition from leaving that program and then kind of heading into the real world, because you were kind of hearing that in one ear, and I think out of one ear and maybe with one eye, but out of the other eye, you're kind of sort of still had your eyes set on something there, and you had some early experiences, early professional experiences that I think really sort of painted the direction you started to ultimately take.
Yeah. Great question. So yeah, I don't know if it was directly told to me, it probably was, but just, they had this notion of, they painted this picture that was going to be this nightmare horror story, work 60, 80 hours a week, get paid for 40. You're just kind of a CAD monkey type thing where they don't necessarily value you right at first. And I just thought, there's no way. I want some life balance there. So early in my career, I made the decision. I think part of it too is I just didn't maybe have the confidence then on. I had some other friends in the group that were like, they really did well. And I actually did well too. I kept up with them, but they just had a little bit of confidence, maybe more experience. And they ended up going to those types of jobs. One went to Denver, another went to San Francisco type of a thing, working for these big firms. I ended up going for, I did an internship the year previous to that, to me graduating, at a design build firm. And honestly, like a couple months into that already, I was like, this is probably not what I'm going to do. But guess what I ended up doing? A year later, kind of took the easy route. I thought this might give me a better path to at least have more freedom, because they had never hired a designer before. So I started a job at a design build firm. I don't even know if it'd be called a firm, a construction company that happened to hire me as a designer. And I was bored after 3 months. And then fast forward 3 years later, I was still there. They went out of business, and then I had to find another job. So I was unemployed for a few months until I found through a temp agency. I worked for an architecture firm, multidisciplinary, in town in Salt Lake City. And it was going to be 2 weeks as far as all they needed my help for, and ended up being about a 4-month stint. And I was thinking, okay, they're going to end any day now. I didn't know when, and starting to look for other jobs. Like, I got to find a full-time. They were like, we can't hire you full-time. So found a firm in Las Vegas that literally the day they gave me the job that I accepted, when I went to work at MHTN, which is this architecture firm, they let me go. So I was like, it was meant to be.
Yeah.
So I went to Vegas.
And so I would say you literally kind of picked everything up, packed up, moved down to Vegas, sort of right away, living kind of like the young Vegas dreams. Maybe not down on the strip, but certainly like in the vicinity, right? What was that?
Yeah.
What was that step? What was that step like? Because I feel like that was a sort of an intermediate step as you got to kind of like a couple more stepping stones into Loft 6 4. So talk to me about that move to Vegas, and kind of there's an interesting story that came afterwards as well with a friend, but sort of business partner, but yeah, walk us through those next two steps, and then let's dive into Loft 6 4 for sure.
Sure. So yeah, take this job in Vegas. I was still single, but I was dating a girl at the time, who ended up being my wife. She didn't like the fact that I was moving down there, and that made the distance kind of hard, but took the job. It was the right job. Just anything full-time, honestly, at that point. But I had aspirations that I thought, everyone down there is going to work on the casinos. You're going to get to do all this creative work. Well, we ended up doing a lot of interesting projects, but none of it was casino based or resort based, So always wanted that type of work. And I worked there for about 3.5 years. I ended up getting married to this girl too. And she moved down with me. And we were down there for about 3.5 years, but learned so much, just even about business. Like, I was thinking, I'm going to own my own business at some time. I'd always thought of that in school. So I would pay attention to all that kind of stuff at this firm. And my boss there, he was, as I look back now, I still refer to the things that he did, inspirational things, and also just things, the way he did business. And I even practice that now, which we'll talk about a little more as far as Loft 6 4, but gained a lot of experience there. And then, within a few years, my wife was pregnant with our first, and she wanted to get back. She was from Salt Lake, and so was I. And so I should say I was from Tooele, right? Which is a small town that you referenced. But we wanted to get back, mostly her, to be honest. And I was a little bored at this firm. And so started talking to my friend. I had talked to him actually before I moved to Vegas, and he had started a firm but wasn't quite ready. And so I put together this graphic workshop with a guy that had taught me a lot, and did that in Vegas, and invited him to come. And we got talking, and he's like, hey, you know how you mentioned possibly teaming up? I could use your help if you're interested. And 2 weeks later, we packed everything up, moved back to Salt Lake. Like, it just made sense. It made sense from, at least ambitiously, right? Financially, it did not make sense, because we left a house. It was the bottom. It was the market 2007, when just the bubble burst, right? And so we had to rent our house for 1.5 years, losing a lot of money on it, even renting it. But in-laws let us live in their house when we moved back, and just kind of partnered up with my buddy at the time, and worked with him for about 5.5 years, until my wife reminded me one day, hey, you always said you're going to do your own thing. And there was a moment there where it just kind of made sense as well. And so honestly, within maybe there's just this pattern of a couple weeks, but when things are right, I don't hesitate to make a decision. So a week or two after she reminded me, the fact that she was comfortable with it and that I was thinking about doing that, she was just like, "I think you should go for it." And so told
Mm,
my partner, we were literally a week or maybe even days away from inking a deal officially for me to be a partner with him. And um, I moved on, started Loft Six Four.
interesting. Thanks for listening to this episode of Transforming Cities, brought to you by Authentic. Authentic delivers premier multifamily brand experiences and smart digital marketing. Our proven approach aims to accelerate leasing velocity, boost rental rates, and increase long-term value. Simply put, we see brand as a business asset. You can find out more at authenticff.com. Well, let me put a pin in that just for a minute because I want to call back something
Yeah.
you said, and I remember being curious about this when we spoke the last few times. But
Yeah.
you went to Vegas and you were really excited about working with the casinos, doing some cool stuff, and sort of working on those buildings and those experiences. Who gets those jobs? Is it all sort of out of town, out of state people that are getting those jobs, or organizations, or is it sort of a good old boys club where it's, very tight knit and only a few local firms get those jobs? I'm just curious.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I found out down there was it seemed like my boss was kind of averse to those types of projects. He had been burned, I guess, and not paid well or not paid at all on projects. And so he was kind of like negatively impacted. But what I did find out, yeah, is that most of those jobs are not given to local firms. It's all like outside firms, right? So bigger name landscape architects. There's one out of, I think it's San Diego or actually Newport Beach, somewhere like that, that had a good relationship with some of those casino owners, and so they got most of that work. And so I realized I'm probably never going to work on this stuff living here,
Mm, yeah.
and that was something that
Interesting.
I did kind of want to do. I always thought it would be cool to do that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. Yeah. It's okay. Very interesting. So let's jump into the story of Loft Six Four. I, I mean, if you've seen any of my stuff, I love a good story behind the name, and this is definitely a unique name. So, my
yeah.
understanding is that it links back to that childhood house, and I want to hear a little bit more about the origin story and kind of what it all means when it's put together.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, if you personally want to know, okay, Loft 6'4", what does that mean? Well, first off, I just never wanted it to be Brandon Reed Design or anything related to my name, because I saw those acronyms that most firms turn into. They originally start with someone's name, right? A founder's name or several co-founders type names, and then they go to an acronym when they want to pass it down. So I learned enough at Landform, which is the firm I worked with previously with my buddy, that marketing was really important, the naming, and just like trying to create a brand. And so I thought, I want this to represent more than me. But the interesting thing is it does have a personal meaning to me, where Loft 6'4", loft to elevate, 6'4" was the house numbers for my childhood home. Although you would say it was 64 West, 400 North. It
Mm.
just sounded cooler for me for whatever reason to be 6'4". So
Yeah.
there's a
Yeah.
little confusion. It causes some polarization and curiosity, but it really means elevate your environment, because that inspiration
Yeah.
in my home to want to make it better growing up, that was kind of the internal meaning. So
Okay. I'm curious if that decision to start your own firm was one based in stress, or if it came from a calm place. Because when I speak to founders and entrepreneurs, it seems to be all over the place. And if you're not around other small business owners long enough, to some extent, you don't necessarily know what you're getting into until you're sort of in the thick of it. Where did that decision, what was the place that decision ultimately came from for you?
yeah, so I would say this: from the moment that I just really dove in, it's been nothing but like literally say all the time, I'm living the dream. I live in my dream. It's literally felt like that. Like, of course, you have the stressful moments, and there was the stress. Like, literally, we had no savings when I decided to do this. There was no like backlog. Okay, I've got this money to invest. Like, my dad kind of ponied up some money to kind of give me enough, like, I'll call it confidence money to start it. But the good thing is I had been developing relationships and paying attention, like I mentioned, in Vegas, to like how people do business, and basically ran or co-ran this business previous to Loft 64, to where I had all this experience. I knew how to do proposals. I had all this, I had a lot of confidence going into it, that I have enough relationships that said, we would love to continue working with you regardless of where you were, right? I had this enough business experience that there was nothing that was uncomfortable. So going out, it was more just the stress of like, okay, I got to take care of my family. I got to make sure this works, you know? And so thankfully, we had enough work that year that we were in the black. Like, I had had the best year I'd ever had in our first year, you know? And we've steadily grown it over the last 10 years. So we've always had positive years. And so it's
I love that.
been really living my dream. Like, it's been so exciting to kind of see this grow and evolve over time. So thankfully, it's just been an amazing experience for me.
That's great. And your firm now today is known very much for, or it very much has a rooftop focus today. But let's say a decade ago, did it start out that way? Did it have the same sort of clarity and mission around it, or completely different back then?
Yeah. So the mission was to have a business that made money, right? And that, like, maintain. So it was whatever relationships we had. I kind of use the analogy, cast a wide net and see what fish you bring back in, right? If you were fishing. And so we took everything, right? We were just generalists. We were looking at things, any project, any opportunity, we were open to it and excited to work on it, right? And so through that, we got all sorts of different types of projects. And through that process, did a couple rooftops with some developers who were like, hey, there's nothing interesting about some rooftop projects we've done. We've got another one here. We'd love you to look at it. And so we were able to just do something interesting, because what we saw was, and they acknowledged, they're like, this is the most boring. It's just basically concrete and a few chairs and a fire pit, a few planters. And it was very underwhelming. And so we put something together. We just took a big risk, put something together, put it in 3D. And they were just like, this is awesome. We should do it, you know? And so it kind of opened my eyes. I was like, this is a really fun way, a fun space, kind of a scary space. Cause I think a lot of landscape architects get afraid of, like, I think we're all probably afraid, at least in the architecture and construction world, of being liable for things, right? Like, we're taking a lot of risk when we design, and then you put that on top of a building, and you're thinking there's a lot of issues that could arise from not understanding how to design on a building. You're putting water, you're putting soil, you're putting heavy objects. So I think that shot a lot of people away. So we were able to do something creative, and I thought, this is a creative space. It allows us to do we have to be really creative, because every square inch counts on these rooftops, because they're fairly small, right? Depending on the project. So that was kind of the aha of like, oh, wow, this could be a really cool space to work in. And so fast forward a couple more years, we got another opportunity within those years to do kind of a game changer project that kind of set a new standard for Salt Lake, it was called Fourth West Apartments. And it ended up being about an acre of rooftop space over a parking structure, with 500 unit development. And so we got to design and move, and, you know, working with the developer, they were really interested and creative. They allowed us a lot of freedom, and it just clicked. It just made sense. It was just fun. And I thought, this has legs. Like, if there are more opportunities like this, I'm probably more interested in these types of spaces than anything else. And mostly for the reason that I think what our secret sauce really is our creativity, our desire to, like, do something truly unique. And you know, it almost sounds trite to say that, because what designer doesn't want to do something really creative and should be separated by their creativity? But it's always what we've been hired for. You know, we tend to be a little more expensive, but our creativity is the thing that resonates through all the projects as they hire us, because we're more creative, let's say, than the standard landscape architect. And so you marry that, and then also understanding a little bit of marketing and going, okay, at this point, like, this was a few years into the business. It was, we need to figure out who we are. Like, Loft 64, what do we represent? What's a focus? What's a positioning that we could take in the market, whether it's expertise? I knew enough that I didn't want to be a generalist, and just thought, okay, is there something that we could own that Loft 64 could truly be known for? And so hired a marketing group and invested a lot with them in 2017 to kind of, and that's where we started exploring rooftop amenities. And they asked the question, if you guys were to put your whole business on the line for this rooftop amenities, what percentage of projects would you say you have of that are rooftop amenities? And it was a great question, because it was like, we really don't have, we have a few, right? But if we had to depend our business, stake our business on being successful through just rooftop amenity projects, we couldn't have done it. So it
Mm.
took a couple years of us they wrote weekly blog posts on rooftop amenities to where that's all anyone identified us as. And so the thing that they did really well was just ingrain it so consistently that on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on, everything, to the point where my family was like, is this all you guys talk about? Like, we want to see some personal
Right.
stuff on your Facebook. And I was like, I think people are getting it, like rooftop amenities. And so it was also this cool thing where they stopped talking about us being landscape architects and going, yeah, I got a brother-in-law that does landscaping. Or they always just misunderstood. You hear landscape architecture and people are always like, oh yeah, I got a brother-in-law that does that, or must be hot in the summers, or can you diagnose my tree or my plants, and that difference alone was amazing. The fact I didn't have to explain, people just kind of were like more excited too, like rooftop amenities. That sounds interesting, like you do cool spaces on rooftops. That's awesome. And through those years, by being known more for that, or at least like positioning ourselves that way, we started to get more of those types of projects. And that was obviously our focus too, was like, how do we make a flip happen? So let's say when we started that positioning, let's say we had 20% of our business would be from rooftops. In 2018, 2019 is where it kind of flipped. And we were like, holy cow, most of our projects are actually rooftops now. And people are hiring us specifically for that. And they were also paying us more because they saw us as meaningfully different.
And when that flip occurred, what was the linchpin? What was it? Just the buildup of, those blog posts and the awareness and the campaigns and slowly getting additional clients, or was there something more high level or, less specific that happened that you can kind of point to?
Yeah, I would say, I guess with this marketing group too, in 2017, when we hired them, they're like, let's just try this for a year or two, see if rooftop amenities, if it has legs, right? If it's going to stick, if you're going to make money doing it. And we were seeing all of that. And so we got a few referrals. I can say the linchpin, if you had to pick something, was the fact that we did Fourth West. And it was, developers tend to do, if you know anything about real estate, which I imagine you do, working in our similar industry, is they have to have comps, right? When they go out and look at a project or a project to build, they look what's around, what's been built that we could say we've got proof of concept that we could either match, we have to match, or that will make us more competitive, right? So they have to know what's been there. So Fourth West kind of set the standard where everyone now in Salt Lake had a reference point to go, not only is it rooftop amenities, but it's a 500 unit project. It's on the west side, which we used to joke and say west side will be the new east side, which, if you know Salt Lake, east side is kind of known to be the higher end, more luxury, more wealthy people live on the east side. The west side is more run down, especially in the city. It's kind of where the gangs, if there were gangs in Salt Lake, just kind of the more like the poor status, let's say, people live. And so this project kind of set the standard of west side, making it cool. Developers now at a reference point to look and go, whoa, they took this to a whole new level too, to have like 30 to 40,000 square feet, Olympic sized swimming pool. And this is talking interior and exterior amenities, right? We're talking, they had it all. They had everything. And so anyway, that set the linchpin, and just seeing that, okay, you guys have done a few of these successfully now, and you're creative, you're able to implement these in a really creative way that we haven't seen, because there really wasn't anything good in rooftops anyway. That it was just like people were starting to refer us, and people were just starting to see our stuff and go, yeah, we've been following you for years. We see your Instagram, we see your LinkedIn, or we've seen your
Yeah.
website. Everything was congruent to where when we
Mm.
said that we focused on rooftop amenities, that our website said it, that our messaging when we sent a blog post, there was no incongruity. We had built a lot of integrity just for the fact that people see that and they can recognize that, whoa, these guys really mean what they say. They're not just saying that to say it. They actually are doing the work. They're doing it well. It's creative. You know what I mean? They're talking about it. They
Yeah.
seem to have expert insights on it. They're always talking about it. And so it all just kind of made sense. And it's been still a slow evolution since 2017, but here we are 6 years into that. And I would say it's stronger than ever.
You mentioned social media, you mentioned Instagram, and I'm curious with Instagrams particularly how you feel like that platform has impacted your growth. Because if listener, we'll have it in the show notes, but if listeners go to your page, you've got a great following, you have beautiful photography. I imagine it didn't start out exactly that way, but I'm still curious how that has helped springboard into new opportunities.
Yeah. So I would say this. We've had a lot of clients over the years. I don't know that we've had anyone call us necessarily directly that I could attribute. They saw our Instagram page and said, I saw that post you did. I want to hire you, or we'd like you to look at our next project, right? But we have had clients that once we start working with them, they either say, I'm one of those nerdy people that actually read your blog posts and I love the insights you share, or just, they seem to resonate. Like it's more than just fluff. Like it feels like we know what we're talking about. And then with Instagram, they're either like, we really love the reels that you put together, those sketch videos that you do, or they're like, we've been following that stuff. So I think what it does is, I don't know that it's necessarily giving us the work, but if you understand marketing enough, it usually takes multiple touch points for people before they're ready to buy. And so
Mm-hmm.
I think what it's done is solidified our expertise, our credibility, and if anything, just given clients more confidence to go, yeah, I saw him on Instagram, I saw him on LinkedIn, I saw the
Right.
website. It's got beautiful photography. They seem to do these sketches we love to watch. Just all these things kind of come together. And so I wish I could say, man, yeah, on April 15th, 2018, that guy hired us through Instagram, and this person hired us on LinkedIn or whatever. But I think it's more just the amalgamation of all that stuff that just helps people make a more confident decision because they feel like they know you or know your work. There's confidence there, right? So like
Yeah.
a term I learned with our latest marketing group, who we've been using for the last 4 years, called Newfangled. Their founder, Mark O'Brien, likes to say, market hard, sell easy, right? The marketing is something that you just always need to do. And if you're doing well, you kind of build this flywheel effect where you could turn it up or down, but it's something that's just always out there. But if you're doing that well, the selling is actually easy. Usually when they come, they're ready to buy. They're ready to go.
Right.
We want
Right.
you. We're just hoping we can afford you, or we're hoping that you're willing to work with us, whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Let me, I'm going to pivot slightly and sort of use that as a pivot point, particularly with regards to sales, because I'm interested about the challenges or pushbacks that you might get within I'll call it the rooftop amenity space as compared to the incumbents that may already be closely aligned with the customers that you aim to work with. I mean, we see this quite a bit on the brand and marketing side, especially in multifamily. There's deep roots and sometimes long-standing relationships in place. Even if the work, let's say, quite isn't up to the standard or up to par or even better, where it needs to be.
Yeah.
Do you face headwinds and challenges like that as well?
I would say we do still, but I would say a lot less than what I found with positioning. The power of it, when you have that congruity with your marketing and your messaging is all in line, and you can literally state, we help urban multifamily developers create immersive rooftop amenities and outdoor living experiences, and that is like to your core who you are, then, and there's no real other comparisons. It makes it, I guess, the perception there to a developer or a future prospect would be, these guys seem to really know what they're doing, right? And so there's a perception there. And I would say that's the biggest thing that I've learned is the perceived value of what we can add to them. Even though you're going to pay a premium to hire us, we'll actually save you more money because of our expertise in executing it well. That by even, it seems counterintuitive, but pay you a higher fee. It might even be a more expensive project, but the investment you make is a 2x, a 3x, a 5x return on your investment and the peace of mind that a developer would have. So it makes it easier for them to make that decision because they feel like they know you already. And then the sales process, like we kind of alluded to, it's a lot more like, I just view sales as more of conversations. So we like to have what we call value conversations with our clients. And by doing that too, we're also separating ourselves because we're asking the questions that maybe a lot of others don't. We're less order takers and we really are trying to be expert and going, okay, because we understand, we see all these paths as being experts in this space. When you do enough of anything, you start to recognize patterns and you start to go, okay, you really have like true insights. And so the questions we're asking are like, we really do care about their metrics. We care about their goals. Like what's going to be a home run? What's at stake if you don't get this right? Like questions like that are things we're asking. We're asking them to look to the future and go, hey, 3 years from today, and we're meeting together and you're really happy. What's happened for you to be really happy on this project? And it causes them to think. And if nothing else, they can see these guys seem to really care about our goals. They're not just going, okay, what amenities do you want? We're not order takers and just going to regurgitate those. It's more like, let's understand where you're coming from. Why are you doing this project to begin with? Since we've been doing that, and then also offering pricing options to where the question in their mind is less about how can we engage, or less about who should we engage, and more about how should we engage Loft 6 4, because we're presenting options for them of like, here's option A, here's option B, here's option B, option C. They get to kind of pick instead of, at least in my industry, it's more of a lump sum or just like, it's an ultimatum proposal where it's more of a contract that they have price in there. The clients don't even care about all that. They're looking to see what's the bottom line. But what we found in our proposals too is that we're trying to focus more on those goals. Like they can see that we've listened. They can see that we actually care about what they're going to do. We understand budgets. We understand what we call a value assessment of how to value a project, or how we can add value. So they can see this is truly an investment. It's not just we're not going to just put money into amenities just because they need to check the box. It's more like this recipe of how we're going to help them in their overall project achieve the goals that they want or the goals that they've set out to do. Like they can see us as a valued partner and a collaborator, and it kind of lowers that barrier that sometimes they put in, thinking a designer, if I tell them my budget, they're going to just design to that budget, or they're always going to exceed it because they don't really care about what we care about. They're just trying to do the cool design so they can put their name on it and it can be an homage to them. I might be getting off topic.
I think you're starting to kind of drift into the next topic I want to cover, which is brand and brand experience, because between the content and the imagery that you share from your project outcomes, and honestly, sort of the branding and project outcomes that we share from our work at Authentic, I feel like we align very closely that matters more than ever in the built environment, especially as these new multifamily projects start to come online and are being strategized and really thought through post COVID, I would even say. So let's dive into that topic. What do you feel like you are seeing in that literal built space when it comes to brand? Meaning, is there a particular combination of strategy and brand that makes your work easier? Or perhaps said another way, how important is a great brand to be a springboard so that your work is then accelerated and almost like a hat tip to something that's already been started for you?
Yeah, such a good question. And this is something I'd say, as us doing enough of these, that we've realized that like we've seen a different, we probably attract a different developer now to where they care about that more than we've seen in the past. And we acknowledge that for example, that's why I was so attracted to kind of what you guys do and your podcast and all that, is that we do align so well. But that idea to like that there's an identity to a project to begin with, that a developer's thought enough to go, okay, we're going to invest tens to hundreds of millions into a project, and they're not going to think about like what that identity, what the demographic, the psychographic, like all those things that go into it. What's the neighborhood look like around them? Like, what's the identity that we need this project to be so that it can really be unique, regardless of the competition around? How can this project stand out on its own for its own merit and attract, even if you have to be uber competitive, what's going to make it memorable, right? And so identity to us, like, we're all about creating outdoor living experiences and setting stages for the tenants to kind of have and create their own experiences and be attracted to this property because they see, wow, there's value in me kind of identifying. Like, if you look at even products, like Apple to me does a great job at kind of like, you buy it because of more about like what it says about you or the experience that you're going to have.
Right.
These user experiences or this self-identity. So like for us, it's way easier to kind of, how do we blend work? Because we're kind of coming in preferably if there's already an identity in place. So they've hired someone like your firm, you and your firm, right? To where they have an idea of where this is going. That informs us on how can we add to by the design of the rooftop amenities. Like, how is that going to play in this overall narrative and these experiences that they want to have? Because, for example, if you go, I'll refer back to Fourth West. This is one where they did a great job at identifying the rooftop amenities. Okay, it was called the Sky Lounge. When you go in the elevator, it says Sky Lounge. There's a specific button you push on the elevator, which is the top floor, right? And it takes you to the Sky Lounge. But they didn't do that there was 4 other courtyards that no one ever talks about that are really cool as well, that help sell projects. Like, they were telling me, I remember that where they were done, they couldn't even sell those courtyards, even though they showed renderings of how they would look. They were just seeing a dirt pile and going, they couldn't sell it, but they didn't even name those. So back to the identity, like, to even point to naming the courtyards, there's a specific identity of each courtyard, of the outdoor spaces also have like some perceived value of like, I'm going to go to the Sky Lounge, I'm going to go to the barbecue court, whatever, some cool name. How does that all play into the identity?
Yeah.
So there's
you said something. There is, and you said something to me the last time we spoke that triggered a thought, and that was, you said something to the effect of, everyone always wants to stand out, but the flip side of that with so many developers is, give us 3 names you haven't used yet, we'll roll with it. Mm-hmm. That's what it's going to be. Sort of a thoughtless exercise for an ownership group that's putting in tens to hundreds of millions of dollars for a property, which is obviously mind blowing. But you made a point that I think is really important, because we run into this too. And you said, how can we design something if we don't have an understanding of the identity of the building? Right. Mm-hmm. And so some would say it's a chicken or the egg thing. And I think you and I agree that no, it's not. There needs to be some strategy in a story, and at least an initial brand and brand identity, to then key off of that for all of these other check boxes that need to be executed and done well. You can't necessarily come into a blank slate and be told, all right, we hired you for this, go do your thing, but you have nothing to reference. I imagine that's a really difficult place for you all to be in.
Yeah. And so, like you said, the chicken or the egg, yes, we've done both sides, right? And I would say, to your point, like, having the identity, or at least an idea of it, right? Like, we're creative enough too, and we're happy to, like, we also like to think outdoor can influence indoor and even influence architecture. Like, there's a few projects that I know, I'm going to forget the name, so I won't even say it, but their whole idea was create a nucleus and then have all the buildings kind of wrap around that, of this identity. But it helps so much when you have a name, like, just there's some narrative there, right? Like, someone like you has come in and they're already informed to go, okay, this is our demographic. This is the identity. We might even have the name at that point. I guess what I've seen too, alongside that, is also interior designers, the architect. If we're all on the same page, it becomes such a more enjoyable experience to all kind of collaborate in that same realm and go, okay, interior, exterior, architecture, how do we all identify with that brand? How are we interpreting that? How are we, because it's going to go to the marketing and sales too, right? So like, why can't you start forming that? Like most of these developers want to already have pre-leasing opportunities. They would prefer to be 100% leased up if they could, right? Before they even open the doors. So like, how do you start selling that story if you don't even have that? And so we've seen on the flip side where it's what you alluded to was like, I even had a developer say, okay, because we start asking them now early, like in the beginning stages of our conversation, we go, is there branding in place? Do you have a firm? We even make referrals. Like, so referring someone like you early, if we're brought on early enough, is like, let's get them in place, like, or at least start having the conversations. We had one developer go, could you just design the monument signage and then we will create the brand around that? And I thought, okay, in some ways that sounds cool. Like we get to dictate that. But to me, I've had way more success when we can take that logo, we can take the understanding of the brand and actually try and create space, objects, elements that enhance that brand, right? That are
100%
in tune with it. It's powerful.
Yeah, you mentioned sort of this idea of as a creative having constraints. There are constraints and there are opportunities. And when we have in this case, a brand identity in place, there's a constraint, right? Because there's not a totally blank slate that exists for you to sort of run wild with opportunity. And it's a balance, to be fair. I mean, it's a balance. And I think you used the word or used the phrase anchor points when you were talking to me about the last couple times we connected. Can you kind of key in on what that is and what you're looking for at Loft 6 4? Like, what are those anchor points, and what are you seeking those to be so that you can do your best work?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think the anchor points, number one, are having the right conversation up front, like I've already alluded to. It all begins with those first conversations you really want to be having those with the decision maker. And then you start to bring in the architect and branding, all this, the design team, to kind of start to inform you as far as like, what are the constraints, right? If the architecture, let's say, if the space we have to work with is too small to begin with, that's a constraint in itself, right? To go, okay. And I think one of the things I do love about this space that we're working in, as far as amenities and on buildings, is that we kind of have a built-in constraint. The architecture is the first constraint, right? The space we have to work with, being up or elevated over however many units or however many stories of parking is another constraint. All those already kind of are our initial constraints that we have to acknowledge. And to me, that maybe I'll call them like cheat codes, but it's like, if you have branding and an identity, that helps us already. It takes less. The constraint is there's already an identity in place, right?
Right.
And I find that freeing. I find those constraints freeing because they always taught us that in school. You look at opportunities and constraints, and they would always say the constraints really, if anything, I learned a term in a coaching group I was part of, that basically the obstacle is the raw material for achieving your goals. Meaning, if you flip that, you kind of get the answer to your question. Like, if the building is the constraint, or the theme is the constraint, you kind of already know, like, that's the direction we need to take it. We've already got the parameters in some ways set. Versus the hardest part would be if someone came to us in the wrong order and said, okay, we want you to come up with the theme. We want you to develop a floor plan or the footprint, when those are out of our realm, right? But that would be so much harder for them to go, we value you guys so much, and we want this whole thing to evolve and revolve around the landscape architecture, the exterior design. That would be a lot harder for us to do. We could probably come up with something, but then you gotta still, bring in everyone else and have those conversations. But yeah, so those constraints are, I mean, there's always constraints, and I look at those more as like the opportunities, honestly.
I feel like there are going to be a lot of listeners that are now becoming very tuned in to rooftop amenity spaces, and they're going to want to kind of dig into certainly a lot of your work and probably scan your Instagram page for past projects. But as we begin to wrap up here, I want to ask, hit me with a project or with a really cool rooftop amenity mix that you just love, that stand out, and maybe even something that you and your team look to as a North Star as you kind of embark on new projects collectively.
Yeah, great question. I'm glad you asked that. Actually, I keep referencing Fourth West. To be honest, that happened in 2014. I think they sold it in 2017, but they opened in 2016. That set a standard for Salt Lake, right? That a lot of architects and developers would reference. There's this project called Post. It's known as the Post District. In our office, we call it Post House, which is really our portion, which is 5 apartment buildings over a square city block in the heart of down. Well, not in the heart of town, but as you get off the 15 exchange, you come right into this area. It's known as the Granary District, which is an up and coming neighborhood. A lot of attention's gone to it because, it's literally a block of, there's some existing buildings. So they're doing, retrofit and kind of value add type projects and infill projects, but then they're also adding this new component, and it feels almost like there's five distinct buildings that all have kind of their own identity, designed by the same architect. And there's actually another landscape architect that was hired out of Denver doing all the street level. We were hired by the local developer who we'd already had a relationship with to do just the rooftop portion of this. But we're talking another 40,000, but spanning over various elevations. The largest portion has an indoor and outdoor pool effect on this 20,000 square foot deck. There's a spa that you'll see from the road as you come in. It's basically one side of it is glass, so you'll see right into the spa from the street level. All these outdoor barbecue, seating, great landscape. There's going to be this focal tree in the center of the pool. So we try to do real trees inside the pool. We look at, we always try and look outside of ourselves. But looking at Thailand and all these great exotic places to try and introduce these ideas here, and with the extreme constraints we have with the weather, they weren't really confident to do that. So they're doing this realistic looking tree, which they look amazing. It's going to be in the middle of the pool. I'm thinking almost like they're going to have these Instagrammable moments, to really make it stand out. But this project, I believe so strongly, it's going to be the next game changer. I keep saying Post District will be the next Fourth West, where once this is built and the attention goes to it, it's just going to be a really successful project. It already is, but it's going to be the talk of the town. It's going to be really cool. And so I'm hoping now people will go, oh yeah, you guys did Post District, you did Post House,
right.
And Fourth West can kind of be gone, Not that it's bad, but
sure.
Time has come and gone.
Yeah. I'll be sure to link some more information about the Post District in general, just for listeners and viewers down in the show notes. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. I want to end with a few rapid fire questions. The first being, in your mind, since you've been living it for the last decade, what is the most exciting shift in the rooftop amenities space that you've seen just in the last year or two? What would you say?
Yeah, well, COVID, I think, exacerbated this idea, which is a huge benefit. I think with these projects that we mentioned earlier, is just a project, or developers see that it's possible. They also now have the mindset and the foresight to go, okay, we have to be competitive, and you got a lot of outside development as well. So there's just higher design, higher level, higher quality is coming to locally and abroad. But just developers' mindset just seems they can make it pencil. So people are just more willing to do these types of projects. So we're able to be even more creative, even more unique. That's probably the biggest thing. Probably the biggest thing I'm most excited for is just the fact that their minds seem to be a little more free, and they're more open for us to be our most creative, right? And to push the envelope even further than we have before.
All right. And I got to ask, favorite book, what would you recommend to the listeners right now?
Business of Expertise by David C. Baker. given, our unique niche, that book has been pivotal in kind of helping us with the idea of positioning, the idea of niching down, the importance of it, and how actually what's crazy about being in a niche or specializing is what I call, you almost get a reverse pyramid where once you go in, there's like a million doors that open up to you as far as possibilities, when you kind of think, if I niche down so specifically, that it closes a lot of doors, when in reality, I call it vivid technicolor, but I kind of see more colorfully, I see more possibilities than ever, because we understand the space enough to know all the constraints, to know how we can push outside of the lines and the boundaries. That book's been really great in kind of helping us understand that, and now seeing it in practice, it's awesome.
Awesome. I'll definitely link that in the show notes as well. Brandon, man, I can't believe, I always say it, but time flies in these conversations, and there's only one more thing to do here, and that is to roll out the red carpet for you to tell the listeners and viewers what you're up to and where they can find you online.
Yeah. So I'd love to say I'm up to like really awesome things other than work, but spending time with the family, going to pick up snowboarding again. Getting hobbies is what I need to be doing more of, which I kind of gave up. We talked about snowboarding in the beginning, so I plan to pick that up again. And just where you can find me is just Instagram and LinkedIn are where you'll see us most active. So just Loft 6 4 all spelled out. You look us up, you'll find us. So probably the best places you can find us. So
Brandon,
thank you.
Thank you again so much for joining me.
My pleasure, man. Thanks again. It goes fast.